have to ignore distraction. Here's what we found. We have congruent and incongruent trials. So here, you have to press a key showing which way that red arrowhead is pointing. So in the top line, everything's pointing in the same direction, so it's easy. That's congruent. In the bottom line, you have to ignore the distracting flankers, okay? So what do we got? Those are the monolinguals and the bilinguals, okay? It's exactly the effect that we get in all our research on both congruent and incongruent trials. The monolinguals take a lot longer than the bilinguals. This is the Stroop effect. You've now seen this a few times. So what about the bimodals? They are perfectly bilingual. What happens with them? They look like monolinguals. They just have not had that opportunity to enhance that executive control system. Okay, so here's the sum up before I just go into the, I'm going to sum up and then I have one small section to add. Here's the story. It's the bilingual paradox. A language experience leads to a language cost and a control benefit. So bilingualism creates a problem in selection for language processing. That means that language selection has to be done differently. And what's done is that it recruits a nonverbal system. It has to do a language task in a different way, so it recruits a non-language system. And the outcome is that that nonverbal system benefits, okay? How crazy is that idea? Think about it a different way. Walking is something that we do with our legs. Our legs are very good for walking. But sometimes our legs create a problem. That means walking has to be done a different way. And as a result of doing walking a different way, a non-walking system benefits, okay? So you reconfigure how you manage, how you actually process a certain kind of problem, and it changes systems more broadly. All right, this is the last bit that I'm going to talk about. How broad is this? I've shown you that these benefits extend into older age and prevent against cognitive decline. That's really quite a normal part of aging. What happens when cognitive aging is not normal? So we looked at the onset of dementia. There's a lot of literature showing that you can actually boost your cognitive system through stimulating activities. This is called cognitive reserve, and the main ways of doing this are formal education, engagement in social groups, you know, all this stuff they tell you about crossword puzzles. All that stuff contributes to cognitive reserve. And cognitive reserve has very powerful effects on postponing decline with aging. So we wondered if bilingualism was one of those experiences that contributed to cognitive reserve, because as you've seen, it is a very intense cognitive experience. Language processing as a bilingual is a more stimulating activity than monolingual language processing. We looked at the clinic records of dementia patients in 2 studies. In the first study, 2/3 of them had been diagnosed with Alzheimer's disease, and then we chose a few other dementias to boost the sample. In the second study, we restricted the patients only to Alzheimer's patients. I'm going to show you the results from both studies together. Here's study 1. We had just under 100 patients in each group. Now, years duration, this is the time between the family first noticing something was wrong and showing up for the first clinic appointment. And it's important because you could say, maybe there's a systematic bias. Maybe bilinguals, they're immigrants, they don't go to the doctor as often. Maybe they're not as tuned in. Maybe they wait longer to seek medical help. So you think if you wait longer, then you're going to be older when you show up. But it's not because of any protection. It's just because of a resistance to the medical system. These numbers, 3.5 years and 3 years, are not significantly different, but you can see, if anything, it's the monolinguals who are waiting longer to seek medical help. Years education, I said a few minutes ago that formal education is a protector against cognitive decline and the onset of dementia. So the more formal education you have, the more protection you have. Therefore, with more formal education, you should show symptoms of dementia at an older age. Now, this works entirely against our hypothesis because the monolinguals have significantly more formal education than the bilinguals. But I would not pay too much attention to it because many of them were in Europe during World War II, and of their age, their education would have been interrupted. So this certainly works against the hypothesis, but certainly not confounds it. MMSE is just a broad brush level of cognitive functioning. It's a test out of 30 that shows cognitive level. They're identical. All right, how old are they? How old are the monolinguals and bilinguals when the families first notice that there is dementia? The monolinguals are 71.5 years old. The bilinguals are 75.5. And that difference is massively significant. In this world, that is a gigantic difference. So all else being equal, they're at the same cognitive level. The bilinguals, if anything, have less protection, but they seem to show dementia at a significantly later age. Well, that was very nice, but could it possibly be true? We did the study again. In study 2, we had just over 100 patients in each group. And this time, they're all Alzheimer's. It just seemed a much purer test to keep it to the same kind of impairment. And you'll notice that these numbers line up exactly. It's really rare for a replication to come up with exactly the same numbers. Now, again, we're drawing from the same sort of population. This is the Baycrest Hospital in Toronto. Many of these patients were European, they were in the war, so that would explain why, again, the bilinguals have less formal education, and it's significant. Again, they're identical. So you can see up to this point, this is an exact replication. How old were they? The monolinguals were 72.5, the bilinguals were 77.5, and it's highly significant. Now, as an aside, you might say, why are they a little older in study 2? The reason is this, nothing to do with the experiment. The patients from study 1 were diagnosed between about 2004 and 2005. The patients in study 2 were diagnosed from about 2007 onward. In that interval, the diagnostic criterion for Alzheimer's disease changed. So people who used to get diagnosed with Alzheimer's disease now get diagnosed with mild cognitive impairment. And they have to be a little bit worse before it's called Alzheimer's disease, although mild cognitive impairment converts to Alzheimer's disease. The rate is 10 to 15% per year. But what it does is scoop out the youngest people from the new sample. So it's all the same train. It's where you put the slice, okay? So in both of these studies, there are really remarkable effects of lifelong bilingualism postponing symptoms of Alzheimer's disease. So the conclusions, bilingualism modifies cognitive networks and possibly brain structures. Let me just say, I had another study that I have put at the end because I didn't think there'd be time. But if you want more on the Alzheimer's, I can show you that what's happening in their brains. But I leave that to you because there's not much time left. So my conclusions is that bilingualism modifies cognitive networks, possibly affects brain structures. But importantly, and I go back to my first slide, is that this is the only example of experience-induced cognitive change where the direction of causality is not a perilous confound. These bilinguals were not pre-selected. Life made them bilingual, not talent. So we can really see how a lifetime involved in an intense experience can have very profound cognitive effects. And my conclusion, excuse me, is that experience is a powerful force on the organization, structure, and functioning of our mind and brain. Merci bien.